Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, here we are. I think everybody's in.
Okay.
So
we can start, Marco?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our weekly seminar. Today's guest is Giovanni Giorgini, a professor of History of Political Thought at the University of Bologna, a life member of Cambridge Sclerotic College, and visiting professor in many international universities. Giovanni's research interests are Greek philosophy, 19th century liberalism, and the recovery of classical political thought in contemporary philosophy. He is actually working on the connection between Niccolò Machiavelli and classical political thought and the problem of modern and contemporary relativism, which is the topic of today's seminar. Giovanni, we are very glad to have you here with us and ready to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Achille, for the invitation and for this nice introduction. And thank you to Marco and all the members of the Croatian Academy of Science and Philosophy Department of Rijeka. I've visited the philosophy department many years ago, more than once. I have a very pleasant memory of my colleagues and of Rijeka. So I just regret being here in front of a computer instead of being there with you. But I hope there will be the chance in a not too distant future. The topic I thought could be of interest to you is, in fact, as Achille said, one of my permanent interests. I'm a classical scholar, and so I encountered this problem of relativism, I believe, very early on in the European tradition, as I'm going to tell you. In ancient Greece, I have the impression that this problem of relativism is still very relevant today. So I think some clarification, and especially some clarification about words, is in place here. So first of all, relativism, that is to say, the view that all knowledge is relative to some percipient subject and that there is no universal objective truth, is, maybe paradoxically, a product of the advancement of knowledge. Historically, it was most likely the result of a generalization of some observations made by Greek mariners and merchants. These people observed that laws and customs in distant countries were different from, sometimes opposite to, those of the Greeks. Knowledge of other people's different religious beliefs, legal systems, and political arrangements questioned the previously firm belief that human society and its arrangement were a reflection of the order of the universe. This beautiful and ordered universe for the Greeks, the cosmos. You know, it means beautiful universe, not just universe. Interestingly enough, this realization prompted Herodotus to say that custom is the king of all things, and Protagoras to arrive to the conclusion that man is the measure of all things. Other daring thinkers followed in, arguing that there was thus an obvious contrast between what is valid by nature, always and everywhere, and what is valid by custom or law, and is therefore situated in a specific time and place. So, from a theory about knowledge, relativism quickly and naturally expanded into a full-fledged theory about everything: moral values and standards of justification, education and civilization, political arrangements, even the existence of the gods. Here, there is, in my opinion, an important point, because since its inception, relativism has always had a special charm. Why? Because it places the human being, every one of us, at the center of the universe, and makes us the dominator of experience, the creator of values, the ultimate arbiter about everything. Relativists typically are also very fair and polite because they grant the same godlike status to their neighbors, who might have quite different opinions. But who is the relativist to judge? And by the way, with what standard? The first and most consistent relativist theorist, the Greek sophist Protagoras, claimed, as I said, that man is the measure of all things. And this statement was hailed as a grand intellectual achievement by his contemporaries, who were willing to pay a lot of money to hear his argument. Relativism, in its various guises, has resurfaced and has been popular in philosophy in different ages. Today, globalization, multiculturalism, post-colonialism, and other phenomena, similar phenomena, have revamped the popularity of relativism, especially in its cultural version in Western countries, and have prompted a response from different intellectual authorities, which, interestingly, in my opinion, range from the conservative Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, who is also a keen theologian, let's not forget about this, and the Catholic Church, to the radical liberal theorist Martha Nussbaum. So from Benedict XVI through up to Martha Nussbaum, a number of thinkers with completely different backgrounds oppose relativism. Responses to relativism have, since antiquity, typically taken two forms. Some authors, like Plato, have taken relativism seriously and have focused on its theoretical claims, finding in it a major flaw. If relativism is a consistent theory, then it is self-refuting. This is Plato's bottom line against Protagoras in the Theaetetus. I mean, if every theory is both true for those who uphold it and false for those who deny it, also the relativist statement is included in this, and the truth of relativism cannot be absolutely established. There are no objective reasons to believe in relativism because nothing is objective, but always relative to, if we wish to be consistent. For Plato, this is the end of the story. Some other authors, such as Aristotle, have had less patience with relativistic statements. Aristotle thought that if someone is persuaded that everything is both true and false, these people cannot be serious, and it's therefore pointless to argue with them. In the Metaphysics, he says, they are like a plant, they say nothing, and we should not waste our time with them. Moreover, Aristotle's essentialism, his belief in the existence of a single human nature, enabled him to avoid the perils of cultural relativism. While disparaging its theoretical background, Aristotle found a more serious problem with relativism, its practical consequences. He thought that nobody can afford to live like a relativist, and in fact, nobody does. Relativists are inconsistent people. So it is exactly this obviousness and inconsistency that I wish to investigate in this paper. Granted that truth is relative to any one of us, why do we all, and especially lady relativists, I presume, prefer a kiss from Brad Pitt to a punch from Mike Tyson? You say, oh, you're joking. Yeah, why are the reasons for longing to be kissed by Brad Pitt and fearing to be punched by Mike Tyson so obvious? Why is it that no one, not even cultural relativists, actually live as such? So I want to start my answer by taking relativism seriously, because I think this is important. Aristotle's disparaging attitude does not do justice to relativism. We should take relativism seriously, and while examining the inconsistencies of the relativist theoretical position, I also want to explore the appeal of relativism in contemporary multicultural societies in order to show that the same inconsistencies can be detected also in the relativist stance in practical matters. We'll try to show that, in fact, we all believe that there is a common world in which we all live, and that is characterized by certain features, by certain generalizations, which we do not explicitly avow every single day or every action we do, but that they are still there. So, the relativist typical first move consists in pointing to the fact that the same things appear different to different people, who have, therefore, conflicting opinions about most everything. Protagoras' example. This is easily shown concerning perceptions and physical states. Theoretically, you may consistently argue that the sensation of coldness produced by the breeze on your feverish body is just as true as the sensation of warmth the same breeze produces on other people who happen to be healthy. After all, you are shivering, and no one can persuade you of the contrary, because it is actually against your bodily evidence. Truth, it may be argued, is relative to every percipient subject, Protagoras' position. You may conclude, like Plato, that sense perception gives you an unstable knowledge, and you have to look elsewhere for a more secure knowledge, not based on objects of sense perception. You need reason, and in this respect, all men are not alike, for some are better reasoners and judges than others. Or, if you wish to save the appearances, namely the data coming from your senses, while striving for more exactness, you may invoke, like Aristotle, a more precise standard of judgment than just any human being, such as the sound human being, who is, in the above example, the healthy human being. This notion, however, is tricky because while it purports to describe a mental and physical state, the sound human being, the healthy human being, it is actually replete with value judgments. Who is the sound or normal human being? The average human being? The projection of the majority of the population at a certain time? The ordinary man? Briefly, when it comes to knowledge of objects of sense perception, the best answer to the relativist is in an Aristotelian vein. If I know that by pressing my eyeball, I can alter my perception and see two candles instead of the one standing in front of me, this knowledge influences my interpretation of what I perceive. To put it like Aristotle, not everything which appears is true, nor is every opinion true. This is why in philosophy and in science, we make experiments and test our theories and eventually ask for reasons for someone's beliefs. We look for better explanations, and we are constantly revising our belief systems in search of more accuracy. Even discoveries like Werner Heisenberg's principle of indeterminacy increase, in fact, our knowledge, for they make us aware of the pitfalls and limits of our search for knowledge. In addition, we may point to another theoretical problem with relativism. Sense perception is singular and related to an individual. it relegates each of us into a world of one's own. Likewise, if our opinions are not tested and contrasted with those of other people, they confine each of us into a separate world. If we maintain that there is no other standard of truth beside ourselves, we are all owners of singular truth that cannot be communicated to others. And in fact, this is the consistent conclusion that the other giant sophist, Gorgias, drew and conveyed in a dramatic statement. I quote, "Nothing is, even if it were, it would not be knowledgeable, and in any case, what is cannot be communicated to others." In my view, this is still the case with consistent relativists who inhabit private, singular, separate worlds in a situation of incommensurability and untranslatability, made familiar to us by the great Alasdair MacIntyre. I'm thinking especially of his Whose Justice, Which Rationality. Nowadays, it is especially moral and cultural relativism that holds sway because of the strong migration fluxes and the exposition to different cultures, not mediated by that typical attitude of Western superiority, which was still dominant until a century ago. So, my interest is especially with cultural and political relativism. As I said, I think that these early thinkers such as Herodotus and Protagoras saw that in different cities, in Sparta, in Athens, in the Persian kingdom, there were different moral standards, different political arrangements, and they inferred that there is no objective standard by which we can say one political arrangement is superior or better to another, because every political arrangement is good for those who have created it. But I think that Protagoras, who discovered this problem, did not leave us devoid of a standard. And I must ask you to follow me in this exploration of Plato's Theaetetus, because it is in the Theaetetus that Protagoras gives an account of his position. And when questioned by Socrates, if you say that every statement is true, it is for those who believe in it, as like Protagoras does. Well, it is evident that Socrates has an easy way in saying, oh, okay, so if every statement is true, why should I pay to know your statement when somebody else's is true as well? And so Protagoras, in a very interesting way, replies to this Aristotelian objection. I hope you have caught the point. Protagoras is this very famous sophist depicted in many Platonic dialogues as having followings and as being paid very dearly by these rich Athenians. Why should the rich Athenians pay somebody who says that everything is true and therefore also everything is false? If you say that everything is true and everything is false, it's obvious for Socrates that no one can be considered a wise person. Why should we pay, therefore, a Mr. No One? Protagoras' answer is, in my opinion, very interesting because it's still valid in our contemporary society. Protagoras' point is that, yes, as I said, man is the measure of all things, but in practical matters, certain human beings, namely the very well-educated human beings, are better measures than others. Certain truths, to put it in the provocative way that outraged many of Protagoras' contemporaries, are better, although not truer than others. I think that one of the charms of Protagoras was this deliberately provocative way to put this statement. I hope I was clear. If we speak about sense perception, it is obvious that every one of us has a different sense perception. I can see Achilles in his room with an air conditioner on his back. If the air conditioner is on, probably Achilles will be quite cold, whereas people farther away from him are warmer. And so the answer to the question, how is the temperature in this room, varies, because Achilles will answer, oh, it's cold, and somebody in the very back says, oh, it's warmish, and others will say, oh, it's quite pleasant. So sense perception obviously is singular and individual. But what about when we human beings live in societies? Well then, when it comes to practical matters, Protagoras says certain human beings or certain political arrangements are not truer, but they are better than others. What does this mean? This means that certain political arrangements, certain ideas work better than others. So we can rely on people who are well educated, and put it bluntly, think of the very hotly debated topic of human rights. Are they objectively true, or instead, are they the product of Western civilization? I think Protagoras, of one of his followers, would simply answer, but they work. The Protagorean author invokes the adoption of a consequentialist perspective and argued that we should look pragmatically at the consequences of our judgments. In countries where human rights are recognized and respected, people enjoy a better quality of life than in countries where they are not recognized. How can we tell this? Because we see that people from these latter countries flee for some reason to the countries where human rights are respected. So the clever Protagorean accepts relativism as a conception about our possibility to establish what real knowledge exactly is. But they believe that in practical matters, not all opinions are equal, and wisdom acquired through education makes the difference. As the American philosopher Nancy Cartwright would say, truth does not explain much. The wise individual then leaves truth aside and judges according to the consequences of actions. A political arrangement that works better than another is certainly superior. This means that relativism, right from the very beginning, included a non-relativist approach to practical matters in situations where value judgments must be uttered and when human conduct is at stake. So this realization, in my opinion, questions the fairness of Aristotle's disparaging remarks on Protagoras, although this does not undermine the significance of his complaints against the relativist. So I argue that we should have the same Aristotelian brisk attitude towards relativistic statements in moral and political theory. First of all, we should not misconstrue what is the case for what must be the case. For instance, the fact that human rights are not respected in contemporary China, or women are prevented from political participation in many Asian countries, should not be construed as evidence that the notion of human rights is inevitably a Western concoction, or that Asian women are not suited to political life. Issues like these are only a matter of ideology in the old Marxian notion of the term, of despotic and patriarchal ideology. Once we dispose of this preliminary problem, often caused by our cultural chauvinism, we can move on and tackle some other issues. The fact that people have diverse images of the good, diverging political preferences, different religious beliefs, and conflicting opinions about most everything does not mean that all opinions are of equal value, nor that all should be tolerated. I have the impression that certain grand and astounding relativistic statements in moral and political theory, from social constructionists of truth to cultural relativism, amount to unrefined versions of Hume's famous saying that it is not contrary to reason for me to prefer the destruction of the whole world to a scratch to my finger. The Oxford philosopher Stuart Hampshire has already done justice to such paradoxical but appealing statements under the name of false isolation or Hume's trick. Hampshire rightly pointed to the fact that such strange normative sentences abstract from the, I quote, the normal presupposition of the expected constancies in the world. In making statements about the world, just as in regulating our conducts, we always presuppose some very general and unspecified ceteris paribus clauses. Namely, we presuppose that, I quote, both the natural world and the social world are proceeding normally. I emphasize this fact. It is exactly this notion of normality, of what is usually the case, that we should bear in mind and use against the relativists and their bold statements. In our everyday practices, to borrow a Wittgensteinian notion, there are constancies, regularities that would be foolish to neglect or cancel in the name of skepticism or relativism. We all inhabit the same common world where the sun rises and sets, gravitational theory rules, entropy increases, but does not affect us too much. True, our free will enables some of us to be counterexamples, but that belongs, by definition, to the realm of the extraordinary. True, again, we human beings famously tend to make the equation post hoc ergo propter hoc, and to take what comes earlier as the cause of what comes later. And it is not impossible that the sun will not rise tomorrow. But the best counterexample to Hume, in this case, is the practice of insurance companies. They trust that the sun will also rise tomorrow, and they have different estimated life expectancies for men and women. That is an expected different number of sunrises to gaze at for either sex. So this is Hampshire's answer to skepticism Hume style, and implicitly, in my view, to relativism. So let's turn to political matters. I believe that in political matters, we should look at the notion of the ordinary man. The ordinary man is a cultural construct, but not an inane or merely ideological construct. It is linked to a society and a civilization, that is to say, to a time and a place, but has features that go across history And this is why we can recognize this ordinary man even from afar. I mean, the ordinary man is a normative concept. Obviously, by man, I intend a human being. I'm using this old expression, for simplicity's sake. The ordinary man, the ordinary human being, it is also a normative concept, not just a descriptive expression. For it is the projection of an entire culture's image of the best traits of a human being. In this sense, the ordinary man is extraordinary in its ordinariness. It is not a fiction because it's based on the features of real human beings living in that society, on a character that I want to import here in my discussion, the good father of the family. So, the notion of the ordinary man prescribes what good traits you require in order to be a trustful person, a good citizen, one of us. Cultural identity is created through a continuous process of incorporation and exclusion. In the making of an individual's or a society's identity, some features are accepted and included, and some are discarded. When the process is completed, some possible alternative identities are rejected. And so we arrive to the notion of us and them. We may simply recall the origins of our Western civilization. When the Greeks invented the notion of Greekness, of being a Greek, at the same time, they elaborated the notions of the alien, the barbarian. In our contemporary liberal societies, cultural relativism has a special charm because cultural relativism seems to be very nice and very tolerant toward other people's opinions. The American philosopher Martha Nussbaum tackles this idea in her seminal essay, Human Functioning and Social Justice, published in Political Theory in 1992, where she recounts a personal experience at a conference with some French cultural relativists who, in the name of politically correctness and respect for radical otherness, stoutly defended traditional practices which appeared ill-grounded or even reverberative to Nussbaum and most of the other participants. Nussbaum concludes, commenting that in the name of just ideals, even progressive, well-meaning intellectuals find themselves defending abominable practices, ancient religious taboos, economic measures that condemned the recipients to underdevelopment because of their relativistic views. So, to give an example, if we take a terrible practice like female genital mutilation, if we are consistent relativists, we have a hard time showing that such a practice is abominable and is unacceptable. The most we can say, if we are British, is that is not my cup of tea. So, relativism should be opposed because in this naive way, it leaves us devoid of a standard by which we can counter it. Martha Nussbaum tried to find a solution by reviving a notion of Aristotelian human nature. In my opinion, her attempt is very interesting, definitely fascinating, but in the end still betrays its origin in Western standards and in Western preferences. you only need to look at the list of capabilities which, according to Nussbaum, identify human nature, and you realize that they are 10. In order to be 10, capability number 10 is divided in 10A and 10B. Why not 11? Because obviously 10 is a very meaningful number in the Jewish and in the Christian tradition. So I think that that approach is very interesting, philosophically very generous, but in the end, it doesn't work. We need a more practical Protagorean standard by which we can counter relativism. I believe that our Western civilization, and especially Roman law, have elaborated a notion which can be of help in our problem. And this is the notion that is typically translated into English with the phrase, the prudence of the good father of the family, or the wise man's prudence. I like this expression because you know that the Roman notion of pater familias, the father of the family, it is actually an abstraction. It doesn't need to be a father, and it doesn't need to have children or a family. It simply identifies a free person who is a subject of law. But the notion of the good father of the family, or the prudent man, is a very interesting notion, and is in fact used in many legal systems to identify the correct, wise, prudent behavior of we expect from a good human being. For instance, if you travel through a small alley in Rijeka and the speed limit is 50, you still may want to slow down at 30 kilometers per hour, even though legally you could go at 50, because you are a prudent person. The interesting notion is that if you cause an accident in certain countries, you cannot invoke the fact that the speed limit is 50, because the judge can say, yes, but the prudent person would have slowed down to 30. So this idea of the prudent man's rule is very interesting, in my opinion, because it is precise enough that we all can imagine what this prudent man's rule is, and in fact it can be used in law, but at the same time is flexible enough, as in the Aristotelian lesbian canon, that we need not specify all the characteristics in every specific situation. So, in my opinion, when we encounter disagreement and conflict, we may appeal to this notion, which is not a social construct that varies with different cultures, and therefore, this notion, in my opinion, it defies relativism. Everyone has an intuitive image of what it means to be prudent. However, becoming a prudent human being is a matter of education and habituation, of a long process that requires interaction between individual and society, a process whose conclusion is the ability to make the right decision according to the circumstances. Since creating a prudent human being happens in the relationship between the individual and his society, in my opinion, we arrive here at the conclusion that society itself, that is to say, our governments, should try to create through educational institutions, the school, the university, such prudent human beings. This is a problem that is, in my opinion, typical of liberalism, a problem that was detected by the great German American philosopher Leo Strauss, who noticed that the insistence that liberals have on the distinction between the public and the private has the unhappy consequence that the government is interested only in what you do in your public life, but it leaves your private life to yourself. And if what is just is therefore identified with the Rechtsstaat, with the rule of law, what happens when the law is flawed or unjust? Strauss' solution was to invoke the notion of liberal education, that is to say, education to critical thinking. Education to critical thinking means that the school, the university, should present us with different, opposite, conflicting opinions so that every student is forced to listen and, in the end, inevitably, to take a stance. It is by hearing Plato and Aristotle debating and on what is the best form of government, or Augustine and John Locke debating about the city of God, that we become critical thinkers. For Strauss, this was the only way out to this typical liberal problem. I'm sure you are all familiar with Quentin Tarantino's movie Inglourious Basterds. So you know very well that if you live in a French farm and a Nazi officer enters your farm and asks you, are there any Jews around here? If you are a Kantian and a liberal, you answer, and you must not, because of the categorical imperative, you must not lie. You say, oh, yeah, sure, they are hidden in the basement. But if you are a critical reasoner, you say, never seen a Jew around here in my life. And this, for Strauss, is the only way out to this typical liberal problem. I would conclude by saying that against relativism, we have this liberal education can show that human beings historically have always perceived certain things as evil. Death when it is not self-inflicted, starvation, imprisonment without a just cause. All of these things in every civilization have been seen as evils. So I believe that it is historically against our historical experience to argue that there is nothing that is objective, that is universal, that is valid everywhere. It is by building on this notion of objective evils that we can build a kind of liberal education. And I know that the liberal state is just one possible political arrangement. And I strongly argue against John Rawls' idea of liberalism as a theory which is neutral towards values. I think that is, on the contrary, the recognition of the historicity and situatedness of liberal values and the consequent rejection of the dream of liberal neutrality that should be the foundation of this notion of liberal education. As I said, the liberal state is just one possible political arrangement. Maybe it's not the best of all possible states, but it has so far proved to be superior to all others in one respect. If you don't like it, you are free to leave it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Giovanni. It was really interesting to follow your relation, and I think that there are many points of discussion. For our fellows, are there any questions sort of you would like to share with us? I don't know. Marco, Luca, you are the first.
Thank you, Akile. Thank you very much for a very interesting lecture. I was just wondering if you could expand a bit more on this notion of prudence, because I find it very interesting and in a way maybe somewhat problematic, if in a sense that what I was wondering if it appears to me to, as you say, it's not necessarily demonstrable. In a sense, it remains implicit what is prudent, so to speak. And if this is an implicit notion, then I wonder whether this somehow makes it less capable of being a part of a, if you want to call it, public reason or whatever you want. I mean, it's if it's implicit, then it's not public in some relevant sense. And it appears to me that in this way, many things can be sort of hidden within the notion of prudence, or that it can be used for purposes which are not necessarily prudent, so to speak. So I was wondering how to sort of avoid this threat of this danger of implicitness, which can be sort of yes, used in a bad way, so to speak.
Sure. Thank you, Marco. Yes, what I meant is that this notion of the prudence man rule sometimes is also called like this. For instance, in some sentences in the United States. So even in a country of common law like the United States, this Roman notion has been used. The Philippines, which adopted a system that is taken both from the United States and from continental jurisprudence, use this notion of the prudence man rule very often. For instance, when this involves economic transactions. If you are very young, Marco, and so if you invest 50,000 euros, all your salary of your family things in Bitcoins, you know, the judge could say, well, this is against the notion of the prudence man rule, and therefore condemn you for your behavior towards your family. So this idea of the prudence man rule, more than implicit, I would describe it as flexible. It has the advantage, in my opinion, that every one of us can recognize this notion. The example I just made up on the spot about Bitcoins and spending all your family money on one thing, you know, shows that we all can understand this. But it has the advantage of being flexible. Namely, I don't need to specify in this notion every time that it applies to Bitcoins or it applies to driving the car. It applies to our whole life. And the idea is that this prudent man is actually every one of us when we are in our best behavior, when we try to reason as critical reasoners and try to make the best decision in driving, in making, in our financial planning, in our career, in everything. So I like this notion because, as I said, it's precise enough, but also flexible enough. The European community, when the European Union, when it forces countries to adapt a law that has been enacted by the Union to the legal order of a specific state, they typically give to that country what is called a margin of appreciation. That is to say, a margin of flexibility in adapting the law to the local circumstances.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
There's someone else. I think that Tom writes something in the chat. I must read the Tom question. Tom writes in the box, I like the idea that the tapestry of public justice is stitched together from numerous individuals, but importantly, fitting pieces. Did I get Strauss correctly here? And they are fitting because they share the same values, which can be seen as fitting borders, as in Lego bricks.
Thank you, Tom. That is a nice, evocative way to put it. And you got the gist of my point. I learned a lot from John Rawls, but I think it is a very serious theoretical and practical mistake to describe liberalism as neutral towards values, because every liberal author in the liberal tradition has always believed that in liberal societies, we need to have at least some basic assumptions, or as you put it, basic values that we all agree upon. At least the minimum is that we agree that we must continue to keep in existence the liberal state, because the liberal state enables us all to live in a certain way. And therefore, I mentioned Alasdair MacIntyre in my paper. I learned a lot from MacIntyre because MacIntyre is a very sharp critic of liberalism. He believes he's attacking the liberal tradition. He's actually, in fact, attacking only Rawls' view of liberalism. Because when he imputes to liberals the fact that they say that everybody can live the way they want in liberalism, but in fact, you are forced to live according to liberal standards. You know, I think John Locke, John Stuart Mill, every liberal author would say, well, obviously, the so-called paradox of liberal tolerance, mentioned by Karl Popper, it's not really a paradox. It's obvious that tolerance has certain limits. And the limit is what would destroy tolerance itself. And I like, Tom, thank you, the fact that this is not just theory. This is practice. It is practice because we have seen when a liberal society is overthrown. Think of what has happened and is happening under our eyes in Turkey, for instance. When a liberal society is overthrown, then people cannot speak up their minds. People cannot object to what the regime imposes them to do, and so on. So obviously, for a liberal, tolerance has the limit, and the limit is what destroys the liberal state.
There's someone else. Well, I have a little historical curiosity. As you know, Giovanni, in my PhD thesis, I worked on pragmatism, especially Italian pragmatism. One of the charges that Benedetto Croce addresses to them was the relativistic conception of truth that they heredited from William James. Mm-hmm. According to you, it's possible to say that pragmatism in 19th century and the relativism have a strong connection?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But I believe that pragmatism took from relativism this notion of truth as what works in practice. Yeah. And the way I construed the image of Protagoras I gave you, honestly, is a pragmatist image of Protagoras. Obviously, you have noticed it. In my view, Protagoras knew very well, he was a very smart person, knew very well that if you say, you know, Athenians, I'm coming to your city to tell you what is the best arrangement. And I also tell you that man is the measure of all things. So my opponent also says the truth. This is ridiculous. So in my opinion, the fact that he was a giant thinker is shown by the fact that he saw the problem. We have different sense perceptions, for instance. We have, we in Croatia, in Italy, in Europe, have different values from people in Turkey or in China. But we cannot say that all values are equally valid. But how can you say that they are not equally valid if you are a relativist? And here is Protagoras' pragmatist answer. The truth is what works. How can I say that my values are better than the values of somebody who believes that women are inferior, non-white people are inferior, people with a different religion from mine are inferior? I can say that I am right and he's wrong because my answer works in practice. People leave China or Turkey to come to Europe because in Europe we respect human rights. In Europe there is a fair trial and so on. So a Protagorean pragmatist would answer, look at the consequences, look at different political arrangements, and it's obvious that some political arrangements are superior to others. So yes, I totally agree with you. I think William James adopted a notion of truth as what works in practice. That is the same notion, in my view, that we find in Protagoras. Obviously, if you are a Platonic, you think that is not enough. You're not happy with the simple answer, oh, because this works.
Sure.
You want the answer, this is objectively true.
Okay, there's Olga. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
sure.
Holger,
Okay.
very well.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'm Holger Kiik from Tallinn University, currently here in Rijeka. So about the, let's say, Protagoras' view that people have different perceptions and values, I think this point only makes sense to say in the background of them having something similar. And the same with like liberal reasonable pluralism, or that we have different political views, and then we this Rawlsian reasonable pluralism boundaries. Even Chantal Mouffe, the agonist Democrat, affirmed the conflictual consensus that we have the ethico-political consensus that democracy is good or liberty and equality are good, and we disagree about what that means. So like I think it's I agree with you totally, and I just wanted to bring it out that every disagreement assumes an agreement. Like we wouldn't talk about whether marital rape is rape if we wouldn't have an agreement about rape being bad and so on. So it depends on an agreement. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. I wouldn't compare football to oranges to democracy. So yeah, and about pragmatism, maybe maybe it's very shortly to say that it's truth is what works best or what works in practice. But of course, like there are other assumptions that truth is fallible, that is that it aims that we aim in our actions and deliberations and reason giving, we aim at truth. It's something aimed at, not attained, and that it's not objective, yes, but it's intersubjective. So it's not like random. So I think there's a lot of room between, you know, relativism and objectivism, and I think pragmatism is takes maybe the best parts of relativism and the best epistemic parts of objectivism. So it's not like surrendering or epistemic egoism that whatever works in my head or whatever happens to be like in some, I don't know, Afghan women getting banned to go outside. So yeah, I think pragmatism is really easy, and I have done it to misunderstand as relativism in a like a simplistic bad sense. Exactly. If we want to like explain it shortly. So I don't think I have a good question. I just I wanted to thank you for the talk and, and that I had these reflections, and I'm thinking about all of the same issues in the context of democracy and democratic claims of epistemic values in democracy, because all of these conflicts are there in different forms. So thank you again for the talk.
Thank you, Holger. Thank you for your nice words. And also, I completely agree with you. And I would add, yes, the picture I depicted is that of a liberal society in which we all implicitly agree that liberal society is good, that if there is a conflict, it must be solved by dialogue and not by force, and so on. I would add that I like this pragmatist, relativistic approach to the problem of truth, because in my view, it enables us to give a very strong answer to the relativist, while at the same time not importing notions that are difficult to defend theoretically and practically. What do I mean? You mentioned the example of marital rape, and you said we all agree that implicitly that rape is a bad thing. But what if there was a society in which marital rape, obviously perpetrated by the man over the woman, is considered an ordinary thing, not a good thing maybe, but something because it's defended through religious text. True, you could use a Kantian approach like Rawls and say, well, the dignity of the human being is therefore impaired by a marital rape. Every human being is a center of absolute value, and so you cannot rape a woman even if she's your wife. That is the Kantian approach. Every human being is a center of absolute value. But what if your opponent says, well, but human beings are not all equal? Our religious texts say that men are superior to women. You can try the Aristotelian Martha Nussbaum and say, well, marital rape is against human nature because there are certain features that define human nature. But again, it's very difficult to defend that position without importing our preferences. Whereas the pragmatist approach, in my opinion, simply tells you, okay, let's say that is your truth, and this is my truth. Let's see which truth works better in practice. How come that women leave Afghanistan to come to England? How come that Turkish female students leave Turkey and go and study in Europe? Because obviously my values work better than yours. And so I can claim my society with these values is superior to yours. Again, I know that a number of people, maybe many people, will be unhappy with this pragmatist answer, because we all love certainties. It would be great to be able to argue that our values are the best because they are universal. I think I rest content if I can prove that my values, my liberal values, work better than other values in practice. So thank you again for your stimulating question, Holger.
Someone else? Okay, thank you Giovanni for the relation, and thank you all, and see you next week.
Thank you very much, Akil, and thank you, Giovanni, and I look forward to seeing you in Rijeka soon.
Oh yes, likewise here. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the questions.
Thank you all. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Have a
Have a
good
lovely
day.
day. Bye bye.